What do you think is the problem with Kristen Anderson? Because she was the first of the hearsay witnesses ruled unreliable. And frankly, I don't understand what could possibly be a problem with her. She was pretty good. She praised for Kathleen Savio. She was a religion minor in school. She didn't get rattled at all on cross-examination.
The problem with her is, like the other people, she calls the state police. There's no doubt she calls the state police after Kathleen drowns, but she doesn't follow up. She doesn't do anything with that information. And what did she do when Kathleen told her, here's someone she says, hold on, Beth. She says, I'm such a good friend for her. I lived in that house for 2 months, which isn't true, but I'm such a good friend for her. And I never called her to see how she was doing after I moved out. I never followed up with her to see how her relationship was going. I never helped her to protect herself. I never did any actions consistent with living in a house with someone who was afraid that someone was going to break in and kill them.
Excuse me, but first of all, you didn't bring out that she lived there any less than 3 months.
Well, we will.
Oh, okay. But
she says she lived there 2 months.
But more importantly, she told the police, she called 3 times, 2 times on March 9th and once on March 10th, I believe. Isn't it the duty of the police to investigate this? You're making it sound like she needed to do more, like she's a cop. But she told the police. She did what she was supposed to do.
Well, she says she told the police. She says, now we know she called. She says she told the police. Here's another interesting fact. The most damaging things that she testified to yesterday, she never said to the police when they finally interviewed her the first time. She never said, hold on, Beth, to the police when they interviewed her the second time. Do you know when she said them? After she had a meeting with Mr. Glasgow.
And what are you talking about? What is the most damaging thing? The knife?
That he could kill her and make it look like an accident.
But that did happen.
What did happen? He didn't kill her and make it look like an accident?
No, he held her at knife point. Because Savio put that in the letter on November 14th to the state's attorney's office, and she describes how he pulled the knife. He didn't have the knife at her throat the entire time. He pulled it out of his ankle and held it at her throat.
Well, that wasn't what Anderson testified to. Anderson said that Savio kept a knife under her bed, and the state told the judge that they had no evidence to show that Savio kept that knife because of Drew Peterson. We objected on relevancy.
That's the second reference to knife. One reference to knife was Drew Peterson holding it at her throat on July 5th, 2002, which Savio put in a letter. And
in November.
She put it in a police report on July 19th. I pulled it out before you came. I have it if you'd like to look at the police report.
On July 19th. I've seen the police report. So someone comes in your house, they pull a knife on you, they threaten you, and you wait 2 weeks. And then you know when she made that police report? She made that police report the same day she got charged with beating up Stacy.
Listen, she knew the police weren't going to protect her. She feared that, this is classic domestic violence, that the police were protecting her husband.
You're a sociologist?
No, but I've been around a long time and I've seen it. You challenging me? You think that's not true?
I don't know if we can say anything's classic. Are we now going to get into like historical studies of things?
No, come on. She has this history of being terrorized by this guy and filing police reports and saying they're not doing it.
She has no history. They tried to put in the police reports and the judge said no. It turns out that almost every call was from Drew to the police. She's not calling the police. She is, as you will see, you know, cases develop. Okay, cases have mountains and they have valleys, and as the judge said, it's a marathon, it's going to take a while. You're going to see that this lady has a history of making things up. If Ms. Parks testifies today, you're going to find out that Kathleen Savio was telling Ms. Parks about problems in the divorce that weren't problems in the divorce. Things that were resolved in the 90s, she's still whining about in 2003.
Now, that's a little unfair to say she was whining about them. Now, she writes a long letter to the state's attorney's office in November.
That stuff?
I actually got it from an author who wrote a book. He passed away. Anyway, he got this, and he gave it to me a couple of years ago. And this long letter she writes to Elizabeth Fergali includes that I didn't tell the police because I know they can't protect me.
You mean the letter that Judge White ordered seriously redacted because he didn't think parts of it were credible after hearing from the witnesses?
This paragraph is in.
Okay.
I think. And she says, I didn't tell the police because I know they can't protect me from him.
Right after she complains about her property tax bill? Does that seem logical that you would write?
Can I go back to
my property tax bill went unpaid, and I don't like the police.
Can I go back? Oh, come on. Can I go back to the fact that he cut a hole in the living room wall? Come on.
I didn't hear any evidence of that.
No, the
Did you
jury's
hear
not
about
going to
that
hear
in
about it,
court?
but you can't deny that he did it. You fought to keep it out and you won. And you fought to keep it out because it's too prejudicial and you knew the jury would just dislike your client even more if they knew about it.
Is there any evidence that...
He admitted it.
Is
He
there
admitted
any
it
evidence
on television.
that he cut a hole in the wall to get in the house on February 29th, March 1st, 2004? Any evidence of that?
No, he probably took the keys from his sons who had keys to the house and got in that way. How's that for a theory?
That's
Let
a
me
good
ask
theory.
You know,
that's as good as any theory. That's as good as someone else did it.
We couldn't hear some of the questions you were asked just now at that press conference, one of which was, you said, we'll be back in mistrial mode, something about an interview that was barred. What were you talking about?
Well, they were asking about what's been labeled false alibi evidence, and I believe that Judge White a couple of years ago said that they shouldn't really get into that. If they want to get into that, they're going to have to approach the judge, and we'll have to talk about it.
And you're telling me what you're talking about. I think I know what you mean by false alibi. You're talking about Stacy's statement to the police.
Stacy's statement that Drew was in the house essentially all night, and we don't. And it's not false, by the way.
A statement that she gave the day Savio's body was found, crying with Drew, her husband, 12 inches from her, in the basement of her home, like she really could be honest.
Well, why couldn't she be honest?
Because he was looking at her, staring at her.
Well, that presumes that he did something.
Now, Neil Shorey is expected to testify, and Judge White did rule his statement admissible.
Right.
And he's going to say that Stacy told him something very different, right?
What Neil Shorey is going to testify differs from what Stacy supposedly told the police, but I think that when it comes out that you're going to find that there's nothing to confirm it. There's no phone records. We have phone records. There's no phone records to confirm what Neil Shorey says, and he's just another person who was looking for the limelight.
And what he said was...
you have to wait for court.
I will tell you what he said. Stacy told him 2 months before she disappeared, and she was looking to leave her husband because he was being abusive to her also. She said that Drew was not home in the middle of the night Kathleen Savio was killed, and that before her body was discovered, he came home wearing dark clothes, carrying a bag of women's clothes, and they weren't her clothes, and put them in the washing machine, correct?
Something like that, yeah.
All right, that's pretty damaging.
It is pretty damaging, except that she also says that she kept calling him, and we have the phone records, and there's not a single call. And if you think about just the details in that, why, if you did something like this, would you bring clothes home? Would you wash them? Why wouldn't you just get rid of them? And
Where are you gonna get rid of them? It's a mile
she
away.
was not being abused. I don't know where you get that from. Nor was Kathleen. You know, I keep hearing about these 18 calls. These 18 calls, 16 calls were he hasn't brought the kids home in time, and 2 of the calls were Drew calling, including when Kathleen was physically assaulted.
I agree with you that a number of the calls were the children weren't home in time, but it is not true that 16 were, and it's not true. He did have her arrested twice, but there were other calls of him taunting her and threatening her.
Well, that's not abusing. You know, abusing is when people say abuse, they talk about physical violence, and let's be clear on this. There is no evidence that he was ever physically violent towards her.
Would you not agree that there can be psychological abuse of a person?
Sure, there can be psychological abuse, but when you're talking about domestic abuse, I think that that's just a bad marriage.
Okay, so let's not talk about the domestic calls. I said he was abusive to her.
Well, abusive is all relative. You know, people don't get along. It happens.
This is a man who followed his wives, who terrorized them. He cut a hole in her family room wall. This is Kathleen.
I haven't heard about that in court.
Well, it's happened. It's a fact. You fought hard to keep it out. It's a fact. Correct?
Okay. We're going to try this case based on the evidence that's admissible in court, Beth, and you can go on TV and talk about whatever you want because you're not restricted by things like reliability, rules of evidence, and that's the difference.
Yeah, but you can talk about that too outside of court.
Well, there's no reason to talk about it because the judge has found it unreliable.
All right, let me ask you about the towel. There has been a lot of evidence about the towel on the side of the tub.
The blue towel?
Yeah.
The blue towel that was there and then wasn't there and was there.
Well, it was there in
there?
photographs. Can you describe the position of it in the photograph? Because we don't have that photo.
Sure. It's laying on the side of the tub, basically next to where you would turn the water on and off in the faucet is.
Is it draped over the edge or is it folded?
No, it's folded, neatly folded.
It's not draped over the edge.
It's a neatly folded towel. And again, Here's where you can choose to believe whatever you want. The Ponarellis never say anything about the towel until 2008, and the the emergency medical technicians who came, the paramedics, all were quite clear in saying the towel was not there. If the towel wasn't there when they were there, then Drew couldn't have planted the towel. And what does that do to their staged crime scene?
Yeah, but don't they say they just don't know where couldn't he have gone back upstairs?
Well, everyone says he didn't go back upstairs. You know, you have two biased people, her best friend, who says, yeah, I think he came in. She says it years later. And then you've got these witnesses who are trained to observe these things who come to court and say, the towel wasn't there. He didn't come in the room. In fact, he was out of the house when we left and gone. Well, and you know where he was? I believe he was back at the police station.
They didn't all say that, but some did.
Well, no one said he was in the bathroom.
Not when they were there. What about this motive evidence that you continue to fight to keep out? That isn't finished, right? I mean, the judge...
No, the judge still has to make a final ruling on that.
Right. How can you possibly think that the jury is not entitled to hear about the upcoming divorce settlement and what was at stake, and that his back was up against the wall, he stood to lose a lot, and that's what motivated him to kill her? I mean, how do you think that's not relevant?
Because the Illinois case law says it's not relevant, and greater minds than I have decided it's not relevant. That's why. Because it's not. Because for the purposes of the divorce proceeding, she was considered a living person, and a judge made a determination. She was represented at that time. Her estate was looking out for her best interest, and a judge looked at it and said, this is fair and equitable. Whatever the settlement was, it was blessed by a judge, and no one to this day has gone back and said that was not a fair settlement. So why should this jury be able, hold on, Beth, why should this jury be able to second guess what a judge did? Jury's not an appellate court.
One of those pieces of property, though, would have been at issue at the divorce settlement and would not have been at issue post-mortem after she died, and that was the house, right, which they own jointly with a right of survivorship. So she's dead. It's not even at issue at once she's dead. It's his.
I do not believe it was owned in joint tenancy.
Why?
The house. Because it wasn't.
That's what I found. I saw that.
It wasn't owned in joint tenancy, and I believe that the house was still taken into account. It was owned in tenancy in common.
Which means it's still up.
Which means it was still part of the estate, the divorce estate. Sorry.
It was
you keep plugging away, though. You could be the next Nancy Grace at this rate.
All right. So, and what you mentioned Furman was on Fox News, and he mentioned that they reached an opinion about.
Furman says that when he and Baden first read Dr. Mitchell's autopsy, they both decided it was a homicide. So that means everything that was done after that was staged for TV. We're going to look into that.
You would agree, would you not, that when you're determining the manner of death, you often can't look at just the autopsy. What's on the table there? The body.
Would agree with.
You got to look at the circumstances. And Furman and Baden had a circumstance that Mitchell didn't have, or the coroner's jury didn't have: the disappearance, presumed death, of Stacy. And they had more information.
So, do you think that the disappearance of Stacy or the presumed death of Stacy changed the physical evidence?
I just told you, when you're determining manner of death, you look beyond the autopsy table.
So now you're looking at odds. Well, his first two wives are still alive, right? Nothing wrong with that. So now we're looking at the odds, and we're like,
the second wife, which you barred. There's stuff about the second wife which you barred.
All right, but we're like, Stacy disappeared, so therefore that makes it more likely that these bruises were caused differently, that she didn't slip in the tub. How does that change? Does it change the toxicology? No. How does that change anything?
No. It focused maybe more attention on what Susan had to say.
Made it a better story. Made it a better story.
It is a good story.
You mean what Susan never said until after?
That is not true.
That is
Susan,
true.
Oh no. The coroner's jury knew it. The coroner knew it and told her, you need to talk to the police about it. We're just here to determine manner of death. Susan was suspicious immediately.
She was suspicious.
And she told them what her sister had said, that he told me he could kill me and make it look like an accident.
Did she tell a cop?
She told the coroner.
She told a cop?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know?
Do you
really know for sure?
I do know for sure. I've actually read the discovery.
Can I have it?
No.
All right. What's up for today?
Today they're going to call the crime scene investigators and the assistant coroner,
Who's the assistant coroner?
Van Over.
And what, because Mitchell's not here?
No, because he went to the crime scene.
Okay. All right. And what do you expect him to say?
Not much.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I'll debate you anytime. If I could have that discovery, I'll be more informed.
And I'll be disbarred.
Okay. I want to ask you about a couple of big issues that we see in the case. And one is whether or not the Illinois State Police could or should have done more in their investigation. Do you have a position on that?
Well, I think the police did what they had to. They learned the facts they had to at the time, and I think they did a complete investigation, and then they did a reinvestigation. And the interesting thing is when they did the reinvestigation in 2007, 2008, they didn't turn up any evidence that was in addition or anything new than what they had in 2004.
Oh, see, I said I wasn't going to debate you, but that is not true. Because they didn't interview Kathleen Savio's family. That was new information.
It wasn't new information because Kathleen Savio's family testified at the coroner's inquest.
Susan did.
Right.
But not the others. Anna didn't testify.
Okay, but they said the same thing Susan said, and Anna said that Susan told me this. Who knows if Anna was actually told it on her own. But even if she was, it's the same thing, the same information. It's not new information, it's cumulative.
Did they have all the domestic violence reports and everything?
They had all of that as part of the coroner's file.
And you think
you mean all the reports where Kathleen attacked Drew?
Or what about the Kathleen's statements that are coming in, or the jury's heard the police report? You interviewed, you cross-examined Teresa Kearns about it. I mean, they had that.
They did have that, and Teresa Kearns testified that Kathleen didn't make any police report until 2 weeks later, until after she was served with a battery complaint for beating up Stacy. And then I think you're going to find out later on in the case that Kathleen Savio also told her best friend, Mary Pontarelli, we had a nice conversation that day and nothing happened.
Well, we didn't hear about that when Mary was on the stand. But if Kathleen...
Because we have to, Beth, we have to put the evidence in and then we have to call the witness. There's rules of evidence. And we are trying... We couldn't ask her because this statement hadn't come in
yet. Okay,
right.
Fair enough. All right, so... but you could have and said it'll be connected later, couldn't you have?
No.
Okay, it's not one of those situations.
No.
But do you think
we're actually trying to follow the rules?
Do you think Kathleen Savio was truthful in that statement that she wrote out?
Absolutely not.
Oh, then do you think that her last line, he told me he couldn't ever hurt me, was also a lie?
No.
Okay, so some are lies and some are truthful.
No, I don't think that that's a lie that he had told her he could never hurt her, because he never said anything where he could hurt her. He never threatened her. He never did anything. She vacillates. That was the police officer's words. She vacillated about all sorts of things.
No, that was written in the report.
Right, and that was the officer's words. She vacillated about what happened.
The words
was written by the officer.
Drew said he could never hurt me were Kathleen Savio's words, not Kearns' words.
Right.
All right, and you say she was telling the truth at that point, but she wasn't truthful earlier in the report. That's dangerous.
Why?
Because you're cherry picking. Don't believe this, it doesn't help us. Believe this, it helps us.
No, I'm positive that Drew told Kathleen on many occasions when Kathleen would say things or act erratically, I could never hurt you. There's no evidence
That's why
that
he
ever
tried
hurt
to
her.
hire someone for $25,000 to hurt her because he couldn't hurt her, he says.
No, he didn't.
Let's talk about the jury. Let's talk about something a little more fun. I can't see all of the jurors from where I sit in the courtroom. I see some of them. So I did not notice what has been reported, which is that on Wednesday they all wore red and yesterday they all wore blue.
Right.
Did you see that?
I did. I didn't notice it on Wednesday, but it was reported they all wore red. I did notice yesterday they were all wearing blue. If you notice, the Lopez's, or as some of the reporters refer to them now as the Lopi, because they're plural, were wearing red, and the next day the jurors wore red. Then the Lopi were wearing blue, and the next day the jurors were wearing blue.
Yeah, but they wore yellow. They wore yellow earlier this week, and the jurors didn't wear yellow.
Well,
maybe
they hadn't picked up on it yet or decided. So yesterday they had pink and black.
Okay,
so we'll see what the jurors wear today.
Joe Lopez had bright pink socks on with his pink tie. It's great. Anyway, what does that say to you?
It says that the jurors are are having a little bit of fun.
All right. It says they're yeah, that's right. I think it looks good for a verdict, whichever way it goes. They're together, right?
It looks like they're getting along.
Thank you for joining me again for another match. I first want to ask you what you say to people who believe that the defense team is just too confident.
I don't know that we're too confident. I think that to be a defense lawyer, to stand up in front of a jury and to handle a high-profile case like this, you have to have a certain amount of confidence, just so that you don't project any problems when you're in front of the jury. But I don't know that we're too confident. Ultimately, it's what the jury thinks of the case. It's not what we think of the case. I think we want to present a positive image because we believe that our client is actually innocent. I know you disagree.
I don't have an opinion.
Well,
in our matches here, yes, I take a side to challenge you because the jury is not hearing all the truth. But we'll get to that.
The jury is hearing all the truth. Juries decide cases based on admissible evidence. Admissible evidence is what at least they decide. Well, the jury decides what the truth is.
The jury decides what the evidence shows that's before them, not necessarily the truth. And you say the jury will decide the case based on admissible evidence. You know what? The evidence at the beginning of this case 2 years ago was very different from the evidence now because what was admissible 2 years ago, what was inadmissible 2 years ago is now admissible.
Right. So the jury is hearing more, and what's now admissible is evidence that the esteemed Judge White, who I believe is an expert on your network, found to be inadmissible because it was unreliable. Are you questioning his judgment now?
No, I'm not, because I wasn't at that hearing, and I didn't see how Kristen Anderson did on the stand and how Susan Doman did on the stand, but I saw them in the courtroom here, and I thought they did pretty well.
Okay.
Didn't you?
No.
Why?
Well, again, it's for the jury to comment on the witnesses. We're prohibited from commenting specifically about witnesses under the rules here, but there are problems with their testimony. When people say that they had conversations and they describe those conversations in great detail, and then they say, oh, you know what, it turns out I wasn't there. That wasn't where the conversation took place. But the words that were said, I still remember. That's just doesn't sound believable.
That's the nursing student, Mary Parks. I was talking about Kristen Anderson. Well, let's talk about Susan Doman. She got hammered on cross about a book movie contract.
I think you're going to find out that Ms. Anderson maybe wasn't living there like she said she was for as long as she said she was. But we'll wait. This will give you something to look forward to.
But that didn't come out.
Well,
why didn't you do that?
Well, because you have to put on other witnesses to show that prior witnesses may not have been telling the truth.
Why didn't you just cross-examine her on it?
She was cross-examined on it, and she said, this is how long I lived here, and I was paying rent and so forth, and I think you're going to find out from a witness later on that maybe that wasn't true.
Well, she knows when she closed on her house, and it was November 25th, 2003, and she moved out on that day. Now, Susan Doman...
On Thanksgiving.
Just before Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was a few days later, I looked. Susan Doman was really hammered on cross-examination about a book-movie contract from 2009, as though that affects her testimony today. The contract that's not even effective anymore.
It is effective. It is effective. The contract had a provision in it that kept it in effect until after the trial at the agent's option, and the agent has never sent her any documentation canceling the contract. Susan Doman claims, I said, oh, I don't want to be bound by this anymore. I think I sent an email. She can't produce the email. We've never seen the email. I agree that it might not, on its face, affect what she said previously, but it shows that she wants to profit from her own sister's death.
What about wanting to help other people learn from her sister's domestic abuse?
Well, if that was what she wanted, I would think the contract would say that. Instead, the contract says that it will be a colorful portrayal. And the contract says, and this is in evidence, the contract says that the movie is supposed to focus on Susan Doman and be from Susan Doman's perspective.
Because they bought her rights, because Kathleen's gone and they can't get Kathleen's story. So of course it's from Susan Doman. They buy her rights, her story, and it's about her sister's life from Susan's perspective.
If I was going to sell Beth Karas' story, I would not.
You don't know enough about me. You can't sell my story.
Thank God. But
take that back.
If I was going to sell Beth Karas' story, I would not say I'm going to sell Beth Karas' story from Steve Greenberg's perspective. I would sell Beth Karas' story and they would tell the story as if it were in the first
You-
person, not in the third
No.
person like one of these
No, they
TV
buy some-
sitcoms where How I Met Your Mother, where they tell it from a third
No, they
person perspective.
well, let's not. We're getting off track, but they were optioning her rights. She's the sister. You don't know enough about me. You couldn't sell my story. Anyway, okay. Let me ask you.
But
is
I
it-
know I'd get a lot of money for it.
Yeah, maybe. Is it the defense's position that this was the death of Kathleen Savio was an accident? It was an accident only, or are you also going to argue, even if you believe it's a homicide, Drew Peterson didn't do it?
That you would have to ask Mr. Lopez, but and I don't want to get into exactly what our strategy is, but I think that all of the evidence, you're going to find out all the credible evidence, is it was an accident.
Because people are writing in to us, viewers are writing in, wondering why Maniaci couldn't be considered a suspect, the boyfriend. I mean, they had a fight. He wasn't around that weekend. You know, he was home alone the night that she's killed. You know, why?
Well,
Why didn't you come?
He might be considered a suspect at the end of the case. He might not. I think that's left for closing argument. The idea that Joe Lopez, who did a great job, I thought, on Maniaci and the way he approached it, the idea that he's going to ask him a question and Mr. Maniaci is all of a sudden going to break down in the witness stand and go, you know what, I killed her. You know, that's that Perry Mason moment that we all want.
That, but you didn't even ask him if he killed her. Nobody asked him.
Well, what do you think he would have said?
No, but you ask him anyway. No? All right.
I wouldn't have.
You touched on how a trial is basically a search for the truth under admissible evidence. Why shouldn't the jury know that Drew Peterson had a pattern of threatening his wives? Wife number 2, you fought to keep it out, and it's out. Vicki Connolly, he said he could kill her and make it look like an accident. The jury's not going to hear that. It didn't happen. Wife number 3, he could kill her and make it look like an accident. State says he did it. Wife number 4, he could kill her and make her disappear. Many believe he did it. Why can't the jury know there's a pattern here with this man?
Well, I haven't heard wife number 4, he could kill her and make her disappear.
I thought I read that.
I don't think that anyone says that he ever said that. Vicki Connolly never said anything until years later. And again, things are remote. We don't convict people based on patterns of evidence. We convict people on actual evidence, because we don't convict people based on rumor, and we don't have trials that are mini trials. We try.
Pattern evidence is routinely admitted at trials.
It is. It's pattern evidence that's relevant, not that's from 15 or 20 years beforehand. We're trying to convict people.
I can kill you
on
and make it look like an accident isn't relevant?
Well, it's going to come in when it comes to Miss Savio. I think the jury's already heard that.
Shouldn't they hear that he did that before? Threatened it?
I don't think so. I don't think anyone believed that he did that before. I think that's why it was kept out.
No, it was kept out because it was prejudicial and remote, not because it wasn't believable.
Well, I think we differ on that.
Really?
We do.
No, I mean, it really was kept out because it wasn't
I think it
believable?
was kept out because it was remote, prejudicial, and not reliable.
It's remote and prejudicial. Okay, not reliable. All right, I don't know if I agree with you.